I thought I was alone in the living room, until the nanny smiled at me in a way that made my heart stop. The living room was bathed in late afternoon sunlight,
You don't have
the
to go.
soft gold
I
filtering
know,
through the
but
curtains and scattering tiny
want
specks
to.
of dust that floated lazily in the air. I sat slouched on the worn leather sofa, absently flipping through a book I hadn't really been reading. My mind was elsewhere, tangled in the usual mix of work, life, and the quiet loneliness that had followed me home. The house was silent, almost too silent, save for the faint hum of the old refrigerator from the kitchen. I had thought I was alone. That illusion shattered the moment I felt a presence, subtle at first, a faint creak of the floorboards, a shadow slipping across the light. I looked up, and there she was. The nanny. She had been in the house all week, but I had rarely seen her outside her daily routines. Standing at the doorway, she wasn't imposing, yet somehow she commanded the space without effort. Her posture was elegant, yet relaxed, a quiet confidence that made her seem like she belonged in the warm, golden light that surrounded her. Her eyes caught mine, and for a moment, the world seemed to narrow. There was no judgment in her gaze, only something softer, curiosity, perhaps, or amusement. She smiled, but it wasn't the casual, passing smile one might give to a stranger. It was knowing, almost intimate, like she had caught a secret she wasn't ready to share yet. I could feel my heart speed up, a little panic threading through the warmth that rose in my chest. I tried to focus back on my book, but the words blurred, the pages meaningless against the quiet electricity in the room. She stepped forward, and the soft swish of her dress brushing against the floor was oddly mesmerizing. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume, something floral, subtle, comforting, and it seemed to anchor me in the moment, making every second stretch. Her presence had a weight to it, not heavy or oppressive, but tangible. I realized I was aware of every detail. The way her hair caught the light, the gentle curve of her smile, the slow, deliberate way she moved. As she passed by to adjust the throw pillow on the armchair, her hand brushed against my shoulder. It was light, almost accidental, but enough to send a shiver down my spine. I froze, aware of how close she was, of how the warmth of her body seemed to seep into the space around her. And then she did something that caught me entirely off guard. She lingered for a fraction of a second longer than necessary, her eyes soft, her smile just faint enough to make me question whether she had noticed the small thrill that ran through me. She didn't speak, but the silence itself was heavy, filled with meaning. I wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but my voice felt trapped in my throat. Instead, I sat there, aware of her presence, aware of myself, aware of something shifting between us. It was subtle, imperceptible to anyone else, but to me, it was the first spark in a quiet, impossible kind of connection. And in that single, suspended moment, I realized that nothing about this afternoon would feel ordinary ever again. The next few days passed in a gentle rhythm, the kind that lulls you into a sense of quiet normalcy until a single detail reminds you how fragile that calm really is. I found myself noticing her more than I intended. The nanny, with her graceful confidence and subtle charm, moving through the house like a soft melody you can't stop thinking about. It started with the glances. I would be tidying the living room, running a hand over the polished surface of the coffee table or straightening a cushion, and I'd catch her watching me from the doorway. She didn't do it openly. There was no obvious stare. Instead, she leaned lightly against the frame, one foot crossed over the other, her arms folded loosely, head tilted just slightly to the side. That small tilt made her expression unreadable at first, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips, eyes that seemed to take in more than just my movements. Every time our eyes met, I felt a jolt, a quiet surge of something I couldn't name. My chest tightened, my pulse quickened, and I would quickly look away, pretending to focus on the mundane tasks in front of me. But it was impossible to ignore the way the air seemed charged, how the room itself felt smaller, warmer, somehow more intimate in her presence. One afternoon, she crossed the room with a basket of laundry, and for a fleeting moment, she paused near me. Her hair fell over one shoulder, catching the sunlight in a way that made it glow faintly gold. She didn't speak, but there was an unmistakable attentiveness in the way she watched my hands move. I was painfully aware of the gap between us, the subtle tension in the space that separated our bodies, and yet it didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt inevitable. I caught myself studying her too, noticing the gentle lines at the corners of her eyes when she smiled, the way her fingers flexed as she shifted the laundry from hand to hand. There was a warmth in her gaze, a kind of quiet approval, that made me feel both exposed and comforted at the same time. My thoughts spun. Was she aware of how acutely I noticed her? Did she feel the same strange pull I felt whenever she lingered near me? Even the small sounds became amplified. The soft tap of her shoe on the floor, the faint rustle of her clothing as she moved, the sigh she let out when she adjusted the curtains. All of it carved out a space where I felt alive in a way I hadn't in months. And yet, she remained untouchable in her grace, her composure never faltering, as though she existed just beyond the reach of my own hesitations. By the end of the day, I would retreat to the corner of the room I had claimed as mine, replaying each glance, each small movement, each almost touch, over and over in my mind. There was a quiet ache in that repetition, a longing for something I couldn't name and perhaps wasn't supposed to feel. And in that quiet, suspended moment, I realized her presence had begun to occupy my thoughts entirely. It was no longer just the living room, the sunlight, or the mundane chores. It was her, every detail of her, lingering in the air long after she had left it. Something was stirring between us, unspoken and undeniable, and for the first time, I didn't want to look away. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, though nothing about it felt ordinary once it unfolded. I was bent over, reaching for a book on the lower shelf of the living room cabinet, my fingers brushing against the cool, polished wood. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and sunlight, the air carrying the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the soft rustle of curtains swaying in a lazy breeze. I thought I was alone, but of course she was there. Her presence was almost imperceptible at first, a slight shift of air, the softest creak of the floorboard beneath her weight. I froze for a heartbeat, aware of her before I even saw her. Then, in a movement that seemed entirely natural, she stepped closer, reaching for a blanket folded on the lower shelf beside me. Our hands brushed. It was brief, almost accidental, but enough to send a jolt through me. My skin prickled at the light contact, a warmth spreading from my shoulder down my arm. I felt the faint tremor in my fingers, the subtle racing of my heartbeat, and the way the moment stretched into something much larger than its physical reality. She didn't pull away immediately. Instead, her hand lingered, brushing against mine with a softness that made my chest tighten. Her gaze met mine, steady and calm, yet there was a hint of something unspoken, a spark of recognition, an acknowledgement of the tension that neither of us dared to name aloud. She gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, one that suggested both amusement and understanding. I wanted to speak, to break the silence, but words stuck in my throat. Instead, I remained frozen, aware of the tiny electric current that had passed between us. The warmth of her hand against mine, the subtle pressure of her fingers brushing mine, seemed to anchor the moment, making it impossible to dismiss. I could feel the faint scent of her perfume, a delicate mix of vanilla and lavender, wrapping around me like a quiet reassurance. She pulled her hand back finally, though very slowly, as if reluctant to break the fragile connection. I exhaled, almost imperceptibly, and felt a mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief because nothing inappropriate had happened, and disappointment because a fleeting touch had awakened something inside me I wasn't ready to confront. The living room seemed suddenly charged, every object sharper in my awareness. The way sunlight hit the worn leather of the sofa, the faint creases of the rug under my knees, the gentle sway of her dress as she moved to straighten a cushion. I noticed everything about her, more intensely than before, the subtle lines of her face, the warmth in her smile, the way she seemed both close and untouchable at the same time. I realized then that this was more than a simple, accidental touch. It was the first tangible spark of something deeper, a quiet pull, unspoken but undeniable. And in that moment, the living room transformed from a simple, empty space into a stage for the slow, thrilling tension that had begun to take root between us. From across the room, I watched her move, each step deliberate yet effortless, and I understood that nothing about her presence would ever feel ordinary again. The evening settled over the house with a gentle hush, the golden light fading into a soft, dusky amber that pooled in the corners of the living room. I had been lingering near the sofa, pretending to organize books I didn't really intend to touch, when she returned with 2 mugs of tea. The steam curled into the air, carrying the faint, comforting scent of chamomile, and she set one down near me with a quiet grace that made my chest tighten without warning. We sat on opposite ends of the sofa, a polite distance separating us, yet the air between us felt charged with unspoken meaning. There was a pause before words came, a stillness that seemed to stretch long enough for my heart to notice every detail. The soft rise and fall of her chest with each breath, the gentle way her hands cradled the mug, the delicate curve of her fingers. I tried to focus on the tea, but her presence pulled my attention elsewhere. She spoke first, her voice warm, low, and steady, sharing a small story, something personal, but not overly revealing. Perhaps it was a memory of a long-forgotten evening, or a minor disappointment from her day. Whatever it was, I found myself leaning in, drawn not by curiosity alone, but by a desire to witness her openness, the vulnerability she seldom allowed others to see. As I listened, I felt a subtle shift. The space between us seemed smaller, as though the words themselves were drawing us closer. She reached over to adjust a cushion near me, her hand brushing against my arm in the most natural, unforced way. The contact was fleeting, yet it left a warmth lingering, a quiet reassurance that spoke louder than any words could. I felt my shoulders relax, my chest open, the tension I hadn't realized I was carrying melting into the gentle intimacy of the moment. There was laughter, too, not loud, but soft, shared in the spaces between our sentences. Her eyes crinkled at the corners, and I caught myself studying them, noticing how they seemed to hold both wisdom and quiet mischief. I realized how rare it was to meet someone who could be both comforting and enigmatic at the same time. For a brief moment, I imagined leaning closer, closing the gap entirely, but the hesitation stayed me. There was a quiet understanding in her gaze, an acknowledgement of the distance, and yet no pressure to cross it. It was a delicate dance of emotion, subtle, restrained, and utterly intoxicating. I found myself sharing a little in return, speaking softly about a disappointment, a fear, or a fleeting moment of doubt. She listened, truly listened, her eyes never leaving mine, her fingers tracing idle patterns on the mug's surface. Her empathy was tangible, almost physical in its effect. I felt lighter, seen, and understood in a way that had become rare in my life. When the conversation waned, we lingered in the silence, the quiet hum of the house and the fading light framing us. I realized, with a startling clarity, that this connection, so tentative, so understated, was growing stronger with every shared word, every small gesture, every brief, accidental touch. And in that soft, golden evening light, I understood that this was no ordinary companionship. It was something deeper, unspoken, and entirely captivating, a bond that would only grow as the days continued to pass. The house had taken on a quieter tone by evening, the daylight fading into a soft twilight that cast long shadows across the living room. I was busy arranging some books on the coffee table, absently straightening them in a way that felt almost ritualistic, when she appeared in the doorway carrying a tray with 2 small cups of tea. The gentle clink of porcelain against the tray punctuated the silence, and the aroma of chamomile and honey mingled with the lingering warmth of the room, grounding me in the moment. She moved closer, setting the tray down with practiced care. Our fingers brushed fleetingly as we reached for our respective cups, and for a moment, the contact lingered, warm, light, and electric. I felt a shiver trace my spine, an awareness of her presence that made the world outside the living room fade away. It wasn't a touch meant to provoke or entice. It was simple, domestic, yet it carried a weight I couldn't ignore. She settled on the sofa beside me, closer than necessary, her shoulder brushing against mine. The movement was subtle, casual, yet it created a new kind of intimacy I hadn't anticipated. I could feel the faint heat radiating from her, the soft scent of her hair drifting over my shoulder, and the quiet steadiness of her breathing. Each small gesture, the way she adjusted the mug in her hands, the slow arch of her back as she stretched slightly, the soft flicker of her gaze toward me, seemed designed to draw me in without demanding anything. We spoke in soft, measured tones, laughter threading through the conversation like sunlight breaking through clouds. There was a rhythm to our dialogue, pauses that lingered just long enough to make my heart race, glances that lasted too long to be entirely innocent. I noticed the small details, the way her eyes sparkled in the dim light, the tilt of her head when she smiled, the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she leaned slightly toward me. At one point, our hands brushed again, this time more deliberately, our fingers grazing as we reached for the same book. I froze, acutely aware of the warmth of her skin and the subtle pulse beneath her fingertips. Her smile was soft, reassuring, and fleeting, yet it left a mark deeper than words could convey. It was a silent acknowledgement, an understanding that the tension between us was real, mutual, and entirely unspoken. Even as we spoke about mundane things, books, small anecdotes, fleeting jokes, the proximity, the warmth, and the ease of being near her made every moment feel heightened, charged with an emotional resonance that neither of us could, or wanted to, ignore. I felt simultaneously grounded and unmoored, aware of the age gap, the social boundaries, and yet drawn irresistibly toward her presence. When the evening light dimmed further and the room fell into a quiet glow from the table lamp, I realized how much I had come to anticipate these moments. The subtle touches, the lingering glances, the unspoken tension, all of it had transformed the ordinary into something extraordinary. I felt a mixture of longing and contentment, an ache tempered by the warmth of shared intimacy, quiet and profound. In that soft, amber-lit room, I understood that something had shifted irrevocably between us. It wasn't just attraction, it was trust, connection, and the thrill of discovering a bond that neither of us had anticipated but both of us wanted to explore. And as I watched her smile in that quiet, knowing way, I realized that this slow-burning closeness was only beginning. That evening, the living room felt smaller, more intimate, as if the walls themselves had leaned in to witness what was unfolding. The dim glow of the table lamp cast a soft circle of light around us, leaving the rest of the room in gentle shadow. I could feel her presence beside me more acutely than ever. The warmth radiating from her, the faint scent of her hair curling in the air, the way her hand rested lightly on the armrest, so close that my own fingers itched to brush against hers. We had been talking quietly, our conversation shifting from trivialities to personal observations, small confessions about our days, and fleeting thoughts we seldom shared with others. And then, without quite planning it, I found myself speaking aloud something I had kept tucked away, a thought I hadn't dared admit even to myself. I don't know why, but I feel calmer when you're around, I said, my voice lower than usual, almost hesitant. Like, things make more sense somehow. Her eyes softened, and she leaned slightly closer, her shoulder brushing mine in the gentlest way. There was no rush in her movement, no force behind the gesture, just a quiet, natural closeness that made my heart lurch. She smiled, the kind of smile that held understanding, patience, and a trace of something tenderly mischievous. "You've noticed, haven't you?" she asked softly, her voice almost a whisper. "The way we're drawn to each other? It's impossible to ignore." I swallowed, suddenly aware of how loud my own heartbeat sounded in the quiet room. I nodded, though words felt inadequate, and the silence that followed was both terrifying and thrilling. I was acutely conscious of every subtle motion. The way her hair fell across her shoulder, the faint rise and fall of her chest, the warmth of her hand resting near mine on the sofa's edge. It was a proximity that both invited and restrained, a tension that held its own meaning. I think I've felt it for a while," I admitted, the words spilling out faster than I intended. But I didn't know how to say it, or if it was even okay. Her hand moved then, almost imperceptibly, grazing my forearm with the lightest touch, a whisper of contact that sent shivers through me. "It's okay," she said, her voice steady but intimate. "You don't need to justify it. Feelings, they just are." I felt a sudden rush of relief mixed with something deeper, a warm surge of connection that made my chest ache pleasantly. We sat like that for a moment, suspended in the quiet hum of the house, the tension of unspoken desire easing into something softer, more honest. It wasn't about rushing, about immediate declarations or actions. It was about acknowledgement, about trust and understanding, about letting our hearts recognize one another without fear. Her gaze held mine, calm and steady, yet vulnerable in a way that mirrored my own feelings. The air between us was electric, but it was the kind of electricity that soothed rather than burned, a confirmation that the slow, careful bond we had been nurturing was real, mutual, and worth protecting. In that small, lamplit corner of the living room, I realized something profound. The connection between us wasn't fleeting or superficial. It was the beginning of something slow, deliberate, and deeply human. And for the first time, I felt not just hope, but certainty that this, whatever it would become, was worth every pause, every glance, every lingering touch. By the time evening had fully settled, the living room was bathed in the soft glow of the table lamp, the golden light blending with the deepening shadows to create a cocoon of warmth and quiet intimacy. I sat on the sofa, aware of the gentle rhythm of her presence beside me, the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the faint scent of her hair drifting over my shoulder, the occasional brush of her hand against mine that felt entirely natural, as though it belonged there. We had talked and laughed earlier, but now the conversation had dwindled into a comfortable silence. It wasn't the awkward silence of strangers, nor the tension of unspoken feelings. It was the quiet understanding that comes only when two people feel deeply seen by each other. The faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards were the only sounds, and in that stillness, I could feel the world narrowing down to just the two of us. Her hand shifted slightly, brushing mine as she reached for her tea. I didn't pull away. Instead, I let my fingers graze hers, the contact light but charged with meaning. It was a touch that spoke of trust, comfort, and something unspoken yet undeniable. The warmth of her hand lingered, seeping into me, grounding me in a way that was both thrilling and safe. She tilted her head toward me, her smile soft, quiet, and completely disarming. "You're staring again," she said, though there was no teasing in her voice, only warmth and gentle amusement. "I can't help it," I admitted, my voice low, a little breathless. "Being around you, it feels different. Better." Her smile deepened, and she leaned slightly closer, her shoulder brushing against mine. It wasn't a move to provoke or to rush anything. It was simply being close, sharing the same space, letting the moment settle naturally around us. I felt my chest tighten, a soft, sweet ache that was more tender than desire. It was affection, intimacy, and quiet longing all wrapped together. We sat that way for a long while, letting the world outside fade into irrelevance. Our glances lingered, words unnecessary, as the gentle rhythm of our shared presence spoke volumes. The earlier tension, the anticipation, the hesitations, the unspoken desire, had softened into something warmer, steadier, and more enduring. At one point, she shifted again, letting her hand rest near mine, her fingers brushing against mine just enough to make me aware of it. I caught her gaze, and in it, I saw a reflection of my own feelings, acknowledgement, care, and a quiet joy at the closeness we had nurtured over these past days. I realized that this simple, everyday intimacy was what I had been longing for all along. Finally, she spoke, softly, almost to herself. "I like this," she said. "Just being here. Like this." I smiled, a warmth spreading through me that had nothing to do with words. "Me too," I whispered. And in that moment, there was no hesitation, no question, only the shared understanding that we had found something rare and precious, a connection built on trust, tenderness, and a slow, deliberate intimacy that transcended age and expectation. The evening stretched on, the world outside dimming further, and we remained side by side, hands brushing, hearts quietly aligned. The living room had become more than a room. It was a space where something new had begun, a gentle, unspoken promise that whatever came next would be met with honesty, care, and the warmth of mutual affection. And for the first time in a long while, I felt entirely at home, not just in the house, but in her presence, and in the quiet, undeniable bond that had blossomed between us.